What would be your best advice to leaders and politicians in the municipalities here to tackle these problems?
Well, I suppose the first thing is to say that if it's a really big problem and it's resisted all sorts of solutions, that means there's a kind of case for innovation, because what we're doing so far clearly hasn't worked. And I think the second is to focus on the young people and to think about them rather than the services that they're getting or what have you, to focus on, if you like, the narrative of their lives, the story of their lives, how they can build that and how they can build their capability and their relationships, and to focus around that rather than where we often start, which is how can we reform our services, how can we make those a bit better, or how can we change them. So I think it's to sort of go back to that sort of core idea about it's about them, it's about their story and how you build that up. And then I think you'd need to think very hard about that sort of network of relationships that they have. Often people are kept in place, in one place, by a dysfunctional set of relationships. How can you get them into a different set of relationships with employers, with one another, with mentors, coaches, so on and so forth, so that the relationships pull them in a different direction, I would say.
But how do you enable this new take on this problem, this very, very hardcore problem?
Yeah, well, I think it comes from looking probably in detail at their lives. I mean, the places that I've seen that have done this, one of the things that they've done is look at the small group of people who do make it. So who does make it out of that situation? And what is it about their lives that's different from the people who don't? And one of the things that will be different, I suspect, is that they will have a significant person or adult in their lives who helps them navigate out of the world that they're sort of stuck in and into a different world. And that gives them a different set of possibilities, a different way of thinking, so on and so forth. So I think that's one thing. I think the different peer networks is really important to build up this sort of peer sense of we can do this together and we help one another to do it and so on and so forth, so you can put that in. And then just, I think, the poverty of aspiration that can often grip people, because they're taught that they're failures, they're taught that they can't do things, they're disregarded and assumed into that 7 to 8%. Of course, that's where they'll be. Well, if you can shake that and create the sense that they're definitely capable of doing other things and they want to, then that can change it as well. But I think it takes, the places that I've seen that do it as well, it takes a sort of collective effort. It's not just about that young person and this job or that cause. It's a sort of collective effort to kind of raise aspirations and raise, improve outcomes, I suppose.
But how do you, as a leader, for instance, in the municipalities or a politician, if you want to enable this environment of innovation in this area, how do you enable that? How do you allow people, encourage your staff to find new solutions?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, you have to say, look, we have to face up to it that this isn't working. And we know it isn't working, and so we should admit that as our baseline. The second thing is, I think you've got to have some notion of success. Often I think in public services, there's a sense that all we can do is kind of, pass things around, we can't really solve things. And I think public servants really, really need and want a sense of success. That I'm changing things, I'm making things better, I'm kind of transforming people's lives. So that would be the second thing. And then, well, two things really. One is, if you go and look, you'll find ideas. I mean, if you can give people the time and the incentive and the kind of means to do it, they'll find ideas. And there are people who are tackling this. This is a sort of worldwide, kind of certainly in the Western world, issue, the kind of thing. So there are plenty of people who've got ingredients of solutions. And then my experience is, if you, in most organisations, if you give people the opportunity to come up with ideas, then you'll find them. you know, not everyone, but you'll find them. And there are more people with more ideas and more entrepreneurial capacity than we think. At the moment, it's just sort of not being let out. And so I think if you do that, I don't think it would take long, honestly. The challenge is about how you make it really work and stick and really change things in the real world. That's the really big challenge.
And how do you sort of make that happen?
Well, I think so. I always think that in the public sector, there is sometimes a sort of dearth of ideas, but that's not really the problem. There are plenty of ideas, and we've got plenty of examples. And actually, there are lots of people, especially at the front line, actually, who are working with people like this, who've got lots of very good ideas about what to do. The real challenge is how you turn that into a thing that really works and that can really spread. And the problem with that is that there are often these very ingrained systems that are very resistant to change. It's difficult to attract the resources to these new solutions. So I think the big lack in a lot of this is a sort of group of people who are good at scaling things. So we've got plenty of people who are good at running things, got plenty, actually quite a lot of ideas. It's how do you scale it? How do you turn it into a new thing? And that's a process of stopping doing some things that don't work and shifting people to a different mindset, a different way of working, a different set of relationships, a different sense of what a good outcome is. And that's a big shift.
But what has been, in the cases where you have actually seen this shift happen and new approaches to come in and work and be successful, what has been sort of the game changer? What has been in place in those places so that it did have effect?
Yeah.
What does it require?
Does it require one thing? I mean, if it requires one thing, I suppose it is a sort of generating a collective belief in change, that you can change together. And the more that you work together, the better it will be. And that it requires a collective effort of a sort of overlapping investments and change, but you can do it. And it takes a leader or leaders. And it is leaders, it's sort of people across society, really, who can come together and see that. And that's a very collaborative, it's a very generative process. It's not competitive, it's not defensive, it's not, protecting your territory.
More like an alliance.
Much more like a coalition or a movement or a community, and generating that sense that we're in it together.